Wanted to thank you for having me. When I was trying to think of a start for this, I was reminded of the old adage that clothes make the man. And I wanted to kind of riff on that with clothes make the man, but it's hair that makes the mammal. I was unaware when I was doing that this is a Mark Twain quote, but I went to the internet and the internet informed me it was a Mark Twain quote, and so I decided to go with Mark Twain here as our opening slide. Then I was reminded about Abraham Lincoln's famous quote about quotes on the internet, so hopefully it's a Mark Twain quote. So to give you a little overview of what we're going to talk about today, I've included a little bit of my background just so you know who's talking to you. We're going to, and sort of our opening series of questions touched on this a little bit, mammalian evolution and hair, kind of how hair was important to the evolution of mammals, to getting us to what we are. Here is my dog Rufus, who is the major contributor of hair in this household. I'll talk a little bit about hair structure and the different types of hair, some of the special types of hair like porcupine quills, basic functions of hair, and then end with a little bit on how we can use hair. Speaking of Rufus, lay down. In research. So my background, I'm always at a loss of how to describe myself. So we're going with semi-tropical behavioral ecologist. I did my undergrad and my master's at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. During my master's, I worked in Panama and Venezuela, largely looking at forest fragmentation effects on small mammals. I then did my Ph.D. at the University of Toronto, working in Brazil, looking at mahogany logging and mahogany logging effects using small mammals as model organisms there. I've also done a lot of work looking at different ways of surveying mammals, efficiencies of techniques, ways of trapping mammals in trees and other ways of capturing them. So I've just included a smattering of pictures of a much younger me doing cool things there. So we had the question in the opening of sort of what is a mammal, or marsupials mammals, or monotremes, platypus, and echidnas mammals. Mammals have three key, what we term synapomorphy, shared derived characteristics. The class Mammalia is defined by having hair, 3 inner ear bones, and mammary glands. Now, when we look at the evolutionary history of mammals and try to figure out where mammals came from and how mammals are related to each other, hair and mammary glands don't really show up. So we have to rely on the bones. And we actually define mammals by everything that has the dentary squamosal articulation. So the bone, the dentary of the lower jaw. I do not like this laser pointer. What if I try a pen? Is this better? Articulates with the squamosal of the skull. And then these other bones of the jaw and the skull have gone on to form the 3 inner ear bones, right? So kind of a related question to marsupials being mammals. Sometimes I'll get the question, I've heard, or really it's often comes as a statement, I've heard that platypus aren't mammals. which is not true. Platypus have all three of the key mammalian synapomorphies. They have hair, three inner ear bones, and mammary glands. Platypus are very weird and have many, many unique characteristics. But what people are asking about and what people get confused on is this idea of, are mammals monophyletic? And it's whether the ancestor of us, the eutherians, the placental mammals that give live birth with a placenta and an umbilical cord, the what are termed metatherians, which are your marsupials that do give live birth, but with a very short gestation time and without a placenta, and the monotremes, which are your platypus and your echidna species, which are egg layers. And the question that people are asking when they ask these aren't mammals is really what they're saying is, was this critter back here a mammal? And we mammalogists kind of cheat and just say, yeah, even if it wasn't quite here yet. But that's, I grabbed this slide out of my lecture and I thought I would include that because I do get that question quite a bit. So let's start by talking about hair in terms of its significance to making mammals mammals, or what we think of as mammals today. So here we're looking at the terrestrial vertebrate groups that aren't amphibians, basically. And what we're concerned with for mammals is this lineage, what's called the synapsid lineage, that have the orbit and a single opening past the orbit for the passage of jaw musculatures, right? Turtles and all the lizards have different skull structures, two holes in basically lizards and birds and crocs and snakes and all that, and one hole in turtles. But so we're going to go up this lineage here to get us to a mammal. And we're going to start about 270 some odd million years ago with a group called the Pelchiosaurs. And these, at the time, were the dominant terrestrial vertebrates, more abundant than the groups that would become the dinosaurs. These would predate the dinosaurs. And this is the mammalian lineage. These are our ancestors. And they are very, you can see these soar lizard suffix in there, very lizard dinosaur-like. Wide, really splayed reptilian gait, big, sort of slow, lumbering creatures. And a number of them did have these large scales, functions of which large amount of speculation out there on, from social signaling to crazy involving, they were camouflage in the weeds, but you would still be better off if you didn't have it. So why? But likely involved in thermal regulation, likely involved in helping them warm up basically in the morning sun. And that key aspect is really what's going to be key to changing this very lizard-like, dinosaur-like creature into what we think of or what mammals become. So what we're going to see is changing from this very slow, lumbering lizard-like creature to a creature that is very active, very energetic, and relying on high energy demands for survival. So the next step is what we call the therasipids, literally translates beast-faced reptiles. which is referring to, in Old English, a beast is by definition a mammal. So that this would be a lizard with a mammal-like face. And what we start seeing is the legs begin to move underneath the body. So we get this more upright gait, which requires greater coordination. With that greater coordination, we need an enlarged brain. So we start getting a little smarter. And then increased jaw musculature, enlarged canines, right? Because we start having higher energy demand. So we become a very energy demanding group of animals. The Theracipid these were again a very diverse group that did go extinct. Most of them went extinct. A specialized carnivorous one, though, gave rise to our sort of next line. And this might be where we start seeing hair. And you can see what we've changed from. We've changed from this slow, lumbering, dinosaur-like creature to a much more active, much more agile creature, right? We see loss of the lumbar limbs, heterodonts, different teeth, dentition, better able to extract more energy out of food, higher metabolism, specialized jaws, right? And it was being small and active, probably likely active at night when many of the reptilian dinosaur-like species running around weren't active. And this is also what probably helped mammals survive the KT extinction event 65 million years ago. And it's just changed. And hair was crucial in that. This change to this active animal, right? Retaining its body heat, being active all the time. And if we were doing my mammalogy lecture, I would then talk about how this leads to mammals now having huge ecological impacts because of that high energy demand. So what we saw, here's what we saw, the Pelachiosaur giving rise to then the cynodonts, and eventually these bones entering the ear. Somewhere in here-ish, we get hair evolve and come about. And now we see hair on all mammals. All mammals have hair. If it doesn't have hair, it's not a mammal. And if it has hair, it is a mammal. And hair plays a lot of roles today besides just this aspect in thermoregulation and maintaining that body heat. I threw this slide in and I actually added a line for this talk. When we look at mammals and we try to especially identify mammals, go through the systematics of taxonomy, know who's who and who's related to who, there are two really competing forces. There's their evolutionary history and then there's their ecology. So the morphology of a species can relate to its evolutionary past, but also to how it makes its living, which gives us this field of ecomorphology. And when I talk about this to my class, I often use these examples, again, being a small mammologist. These are two very closely related. They were up until recently in the same genus. They are now split into two separate genera of neotropical mice. There's actually some relatives around here, but the difference in their appearance relates to their use of habitat. Terrestrial species tend to have short tails, long hind feet. For whatever reason, their hind feet are brown, the bottoms of their feet, whereas arboreal species will have long tails, often shorter feet. But what I added for us here today is their hair will often differ too. Terrestrial species tend to have shorter hair that's much more upright. Other species that are, say, fossorial or live completely in the leaf litter will have very short hair that is upright. And this allows for easier changing of directions if you're under something or in a tunnel, whereas arboreal species tend to have longer, more flat-laying hair. I don't really know what advantage that might give them, but so hair, as you know, probably have gotten a haircut. Hair is made up of dead skin. There are also pigments in there, which we'll talk about later. It has three sort of structures: an outer cuticle, an area of a cortex, and then a medulla through the middle. At the end, we'll talk about IDing hair. And really, these structures are fairly unique for different species, so they can help us take a hair and figure out what species it came from. Talked about this a little bit while we were waiting to start. There are different types of hair growth, different ways of classifying hair. There are a number of terms we can use here. I kept it relatively basic. Angora is hair that grows continuously. Some species of sheep and goats, manes on certain horses, human hair for many people. And then there's also definitive hair, which will only grow to a fixed length. There are different functions for hair. The main function that we talked about in the aspect of the evolution is insulation, which is largely done by underhairs. The underhairs are overlain by guard hairs, which are more conspicuous, easier to see. This is where a lot of the color patterns can come from. Modified guard hairs are what's going to become our spines and our quills. We also have whiskers, long, stiff hairs with tactile receptors at the base, which are used for sensory perception, especially prominent on aquatic species. But, you know, if you have a cat, you're aware of whiskers. Now, one form of modified guard hairs that we see are quills, and these are defensive hairs. So, familiar with porcupines? I went with this graphic just to show the different types. There are two families of porcupines, Old World and New World porcupines. No porcupine can shoot its quills. They are attached to its body. They don't fly out at you. They are loosely attached, so they do detach fairly easily, which is, you know, why if your dog gets a hold of one, we'll get covered in them. The New World porcupines, the quills are actually barbed, so they'll stick in a little better than the Old World porcupines. The Old World porcupines, these quills are actually hollow, and they'll use them as a rattle, as a warning to kind of stay away. So obviously the defensive power of quills, I think most people would understand. But there are many, many species out there that have modified guard hairs modified into spines that are not used in defense. So these are, this is, believe it or not, two different species, actually two different genera. This one here is Hoplomys gymnorus, the so-called armored rat. And this is Paracomys semispinosus, Tome's spiny rat. You can see, I've worked with these things for 20 years, and I don't have any good pictures of them. And oddly, most of the people I work with, for some reason, seem to have poor pictures of them. But you see here, it almost looks like this rat is wet. Those are the thick, heavy spines on Hoplomys gymnotus. Paracamys have spines too. The genus is the spiny rat. These spines are not defensive. They are, a lot of our research was looking at how do these two species kind of coexist. Paracamys is really widespread. It's where we work in Panama, by far the most abundant mammal. Hoplomys is very restricted. It's only found along certain really cool, high-walled, rocky streams. The picture you're seeing here is actually from a graduate student of mine's project where we were looking at aggressive behavior in these rats, specifically putting them in these paired trials to see how they would interact, see what would happen, so-called rat fights. Now, they don't really fight, as you can see. They're not terribly aggressive toward one another, but what we seem to have found, though, is that these modified guard hairs, these thick, heavy spines in the Hoplomys are for thermal regulation. Paracamys can't survive near those streams because it's just too cold for them, which is really kind of amazing if you think of, this is a tropical forest, it's 75, 80 degrees, we're out there working just dripping with sweat, and it's too cold for paracamys. And if we look across this group of rats, which is the Ecomyidae, spininess tends to correlate with wetter regions. So Hoplomys in central Panama is restricted to these really wet specific streams. In wetter areas in places in Colombia and other places in Panama, it's spread throughout the forest. Where I worked in Brazil, which was on the edge of the Amazon near sort of the start of Cerrado, dry grassland, one of the species of paracamys there was almost spineless. So not all spines are defensive. Coloration of hair is really important. It's caused by the distribution of pigment granules. There's a limited number of colors mammals can make, basically yellows and reds and blacks and browns, and that's about it. But through these various distributions of colors in different hairs, we can get numerous different kinds of color patterns, which we'll talk about on the subsequent slides. The first here is counter shading, very common, seen in many organisms. Really very simple. The underside of the organism is light colored and the back is dark colored. And the adaptive purpose of this is easy to see here in the picture of the dolphin. If you're underneath the dolphin, looking up at the sky, the white belly will blend in with the lighter sky. If you're above the dolphin in the water column, the dark color will blend into the background. We do see it in terrestrial species as well. It's not so much that you're underneath the antelope, but if the antelope were on top of a hill and you were looking up at it, the light underbelly would match up with the sky, versus if the antelope was at the bottom of the hill and you were looking down on it. All right. This diagram is very interesting. This is taken from actually a paper on dinosaurs. But when we look at counter shading, if you look at, so this axis here is percent of taxa that are counter shaded, and the x-axis is a function of body size. As animals get larger, the percent of taxa that are countershaded goes down until we get to very large taxa like moose, rhinoceros, elephants, that are essentially free of predation, at least as adults. What's interesting in what this paper was doing was looking at countershading in dinosaurs as predator size on there. Most generally, an animal's color pattern is to match to prevent detection, cryptis, right? So cryptic coloration. The simplest form is what we call background matching. We just want to blend in with whatever we're on, and using the example here of the snowshoe hare, which goes through seasonal molts and is white in the winter and matches with his background, and a brown in the summer to match with its background in there. We get some other really interesting ones here too. Sloths. We said on an earlier slide, mammals have a limited number of colors they can produce. We can't produce the color green. Sloths can be green. This is, you can see in this picture, this is a close-up here of sloth there. They do this in a very interesting way. They have algae that grows in their hair. Depending on the sloth family, there are two families of sloths. They have grooves, transverse. One is transverse and one is the other way. Grooves that actually accommodate this algae and allows this algae to grow. And it gives the sloth this sort of green hue to their fur, which helps them blend in. Sloth biology in general is just fascinating, but they are entirely reliant on cryptis, on just avoiding detection. They can't do a lot once a predator finds them, but they're really good at not being found, and every aspect of their biology relates to that. Other interesting things, they have moths that live in their hair. They climb down periodically to defecate, and they dig holes to do this. They're fascinating. There's now a lot of work on the fauna found in the hair and looking at especially bioprospecting to see what's living in there and what sort of uses it might have. So background matching is one form of cryptis. Really more common in mammals is this idea of broken or disruptive coloration. In this background here, you can hopefully see the jaguar, but most mammals don't see color. So this sort of broken up pattern there of the different dots and spots blends the animal in with its background. I always tell people too, often when I give this lecture in like my animal behavior class, I'll put on one of my fancy camo shirts that has high definition camouflage and has oak leaves and acorns and things, and point out that all it's doing is kind of breaking up your outline, and all that fancy high definition coloration and pattern is just selling you the camo. It's not helping you hide. So related potentially to disruptive coloration, we get to the question that comes up here of why do zebras have stripes? And lots of different solutions. One is it's just sort of a nice chic look for the zebra, much more fashionable than lacking stripes. But if we look at it, the Rudyard Kipling Just So story is standing half in and half out of the shade. People have suggested, and there's some evidence to suggest, dazzle camouflage, that when the zebras move as a group, it becomes difficult for a predator to focus in and identify a single individual and target it. Interestingly, during World War I, before sonar and radar, we painted our warships with contrasting black and white stripes in dazzle camouflage, and it was effective at sea. You couldn't target a ship by sight. Now, once you had radar and sonar, no point in painting our ships like that anymore. Deflect heat. People have suggested alternating bands sort of would create a breeze. Not a lot of good evidence there. Used in sexual selection. Again, not a lot of evidence there. Males and females are fairly similar in that. Same with communication or individual recognition. While the stripe pattern is unique to each individual, it doesn't show, it doesn't appear that it is selected for that reason. The interesting idea that's come out recently and is depicted in this graphic is its reduction of insect bites. That insects, certain biting flies, when they try to land on the zebra, when they get close, the striping pattern actually confuses them, and they essentially end up crashing in and bouncing off the zebra. And what's depicted in this graphic is activity by a specific group of biting flies and intensity of striping patterns on the legs. And if you can get a really good look at this, you'll see that the stripiest species occur where that fly activity is the highest. And they've done studies where they've essentially painted horses and looked, and it does seem to work. So it's probably some of that and some of this as to why zebras have stripes. Another color pattern we see you're familiar with is warning coloration. Here we see the Mephididae are skunks. These are the two species, hopefully 1.5 species of Maryland skunk. The common striped skunk, which most people are probably familiar with, and then the eastern spotted skunk, which currently we're not sure still occurs in the state. It occurs nearby to some areas out here, but we haven't detected it out here. But this bold black and white banding pattern, obviously to a species that a mammalian predator that can't see color, this is a bold warning. You don't miss this animal. And they have the noxious spray. In the case of the striped skunk, up to 15 feet, not as far for the spotted, which is a little smaller. Interestingly, I'm going to caveat this. A striped skunk, if you pick it up by the tail, cannot spray you. Once its hind legs are off the ground, they are unable to spray. They cannot contract those muscles. I've actually done this, so I know it works. Depending on the source you read, some sources suggest that the eastern or the spotted skunk does this handstand when it sprays. It does do this handstand. This handstand is a warning, but it also doesn't actually seem to spray out of this. It'll actually come down to all fours and then spray. I'm waiting for someone to test this for me, so I can officially say it cannot spray with its hind feet off the ground, but I imagine it can't, just like the striped skunk. But they do that very cute little handstand, and there are many wonderful videos on the internet showing them do these handstands. We also have coloration, flags used in social communication. Here we see the tails of white-tailed deer you're all familiar with. White-tailed deer run away, they raise their tails. One, it's social communication to the group. Hey, run away, follow me. Two, it can help confuse predators because they'll drop them once they hit the tree line and appear to vanish. They'll use that tail in a lot of other social communication. If you watch deer, they are constantly flicking and showing off their tail on there. So that's various color patterns we see in mammals. Now, we see many hairless mammals. And in most cases, the explanation of why they're hairless is pretty straightforward. For things like elephants and hippos, they're very large animals. They need to disperse heat so they don't overheat. In fact, the large ears on an elephant are an adaptation to that. In dolphins, other cetaceans, marine mammals, obviously hair, higher height, more drag. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. More drag, so being relatively hairless. Now they do have hairs on there, but this raises the question, another hairless mammal out there is us. We have obviously facial hair and a small amount of body hair. But compared to other mammals out there, we're basically naked. So there have been a lot of ideas proposed for this. Many of the ideas focused around sexual selection, around mate choice, choosing mates that were relatively hairless, resulting in relatively hairless children. A more or a newer idea focuses on a unique hunting style of humans. We hunt a little different than almost everything except for dogs. And that's is we hunt through, or did hunt anyway, through persistence hunting. We would wound and chase animals. So we are adapted to long distance running. You compare us to any other animal on the planet, we're bad at everything. We're weak and, not big teeth, not big claws. We're not very strong, but we are really good distance runners. A thick coat of hair prevents the dispersal of heat in that. You sweat, the hair gets wet, we're not dispersing that heat. So we were selected to be relatively hairless to disperse that heat for basically running and chasing down prey. On there, just because it probably should be in here somewhere, molts. So we do shed hair, mammals shed their hair. Most common types of molding, rodents will change their coat, do what's called a post-juvenile molt. This is how we age rodents in the field, by watching that change in hair. The most common that you would be familiar with, and we saw earlier in our snowshoe hare, is the seasonal molt, right? Going from winter to summer pelage. So to kind of conclude, we can use hair in research. As we said, each hair has, or each species will have sort of unique characteristics to their hair, to the medulla, to the cuticles, the size, the color, to the distribution of pigments throughout the hair. So looking at the hair, you can identify what species it's from. Certain species, it's really, really obvious. White-tailed deer their hairs are hollow. It's unmistakable. Black bear are basically unmistakable. If I showed you a black bear hair, you'd probably guess it's from a black bear. And we can collect hairs from numerous locations, obviously dens, but fecal material, illegal trade. We can build a reference database for these hairs to put them together. And here on this slide, this is from a graduate student who was working with otter and otter scat, and just put together characteristics of beaver hair, different pictures of hairs from different parts of the region. With that, it's relatively simple. There are also guides you can buy to go through, look at a hair, and generally determine what species that hair came from, which can lead us to some research applications. If you're around at the opening I mentioned, when I do this with my mammalogy class, I sometimes give them a PDF of a document that was put together by the FBI on hair identification, so that sort of crime scene investigation, identifying what species different hairs came from on there. In the past, not so much anymore. Hair snags were used to survey mammals in areas. It was very common practice to say put a wire brush on a tree to sort of encourage like a scratching post that you could collect hairs from and then identify mammals in the area. Now with camera traps and things, that's done less, maybe not at all. People still will use hair snags, and there are various techniques. I've seen a common one for bear is to actually just put up barbed wire in kind of a square, and then a bait in the center, of the bear climbs over the barbed wire, will snag some hairs. Hopefully you keep a couple of cells with that hair. You can collect DNA and do like mark recapture analysis, population growth analysis using the DNA. Another one I've seen for primates is to put food in boxes and a piece of duct tape kind of over the hole into the box. So the primate will reach into the box to get the fruit and get hairs snagged on there. That is still done, hair snags like that. One common research application are scats and diets. So one of the things we'll often do, or I do in my lab, is we'll go out and collect coyote scat and take a look what are the coyotes eating, what hair is in there. And then I think actually one of the best current applications of using this hair ID is education and outreach. And this is just a little book I found on the internet of who pooped in the park, right? Anyone with a microscope, you don't need really a fancy collection. You don't need anything other than some hairs, and start looking at them and drawing little sketches and saying, okay, I know this comes from a deer, so what's coming out of this scat, or what am I finding? Or just present them to kids, to school groups, hey, can you figure out what hair this is? And it's really kind of interesting and fun and pretty simple. There are more advanced ways. If you were doing surveys or working for the FBI, there are some other ways you could do to get better views, but a really simple dissecting scope can do it. And that's what I have, ending here with a couple of my little possum friends from Brazil and Panama that didn't have a good place elsewhere. Wanted to use at least a couple of my own photos. And so thank you for having me. And does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much, Dr. Lambert. Can you unshare and we'll come back together? I'll put a spotlight on you for questions.
Okay.
let me put a spotlight on you. All right, thank you. That was fascinating. We do have some questions for you. Rachel asked, are there any animals that have one or two, but not all three of those synapomorphies?
No. In the evolutionary past, that's where we talked about kind of cheating to make mammals monophyletic. What it seems like happened is you had sort of this spread out diversification of things, but nothing has half those characteristics. It's that sort of mammalian lineage is unique in that sense.
Jillian asked why, she was wondering why cottontail rabbits have the white tail, because couldn't that be easy for a predator to chase that little bouncing white ball?
I don't really know. They are fairly social, so I'm wondering if it couldn't be used in some kind of intraspecific communication in there, group cohesion. It is sort of dark on the top like a white tail, so I'm imagining they can tuck it. I have rabbits in my yard sometimes. I'm gonna have to start watching them a little more, see if I can figure out what's going on there.
Let's see, Rosemary asked, how are feathers different from quills?
Feathers are a completely different evolutionary lineage. They come up in the birds and the reptiles, so all the way off in the diapsid lineage. Quills are hairs, they're just basically thick hairs, whereas a feather, and I started, and this is just, I didn't know it, I was going to include a little bit in here on sort of how did hair evolve, what did it evolve from, and what I got into was, quite the whole that we're not 100% sure. I believe feathers are derived from scales, but whether that sort of connection holds where hair is just sort of a different modification of a scale seems to be a little controversial, and it seems like no, like the scale is different than the hair, but the feather is a modification of a scale. But it's also been 25 years since I took ornithology, so that may have all changed.
And the turkey beards, those are modified feathers.
Yeah.
So the feathers can look different and hairs can look different. So it seems like they have some of the same same function.
Yeah, well, yeah, and a lot of the base function of the feather is that thermoregulation, right? Birds, although they kind of pick this evolutionary track up a little later, similar in sort of that high energy lifestyle, very active, right? And need that way to maintain that body heat in that. And high energy demands, right? Birds eat a lot. In that same way, it's just a different way of getting
there. Richard asks, are all mammalian hairs similar chemically, and can you extract pollution, contaminants from all kinds of hairs?
They're all keratin, they're all essentially the same material, yes. You could, I'm sure, extract whatever is there from it if you tried. I don't, so yeah, yes.
Well, Richard, to that, there's a Chris Bloom who's doing research on bats in Baltimore is measuring the content of heavy metals in bats by using hair. And he's also going to go back in our bat collection downstairs and take some samples to compare the heavy metals from the ones that we have in our collection to the ones that he's getting today.
Yeah, I got a little hung up because I was trying to think, I was going to mention something about collections and then I wasn't sure because how you preserve them and how far back you could go, because I know a lot of collections use some pretty nasty stuff back in the day. And so,
So Zen asks, why do humans evolve to have long hair on their heads, and do we seasonally molt?
we do not molt. Head hair, facial hair, where we talked about sort of how humans ended up hairless. These seem to be sexually selected traits. So, you know, sometimes I'll make the joke in my classes about, you know, having this wonderful mane, you know, showing my status as whatever. Nice big bald head, and I don't have the side hair anymore, but the beard. So a lot of that is sexually selected social displays. The lack of body hair seems to be related largely to this persistent hunting. And, you know, sort of seasonal molts, I didn't mention it, but we are evolutionarily a tropical species. So if you look at things like our physiological response to cold and sort of how our metabolic costs react to changes in temperature, for temperate cold weather species, as temperature starts going down, the metabolic costs don't increase very much. For tropical species, and this is why hoplomies can or paracamies can, you know, essentially freeze to death in 85-degree weather, is that increase in our metabolic costs. I'm not going to bother to try to find a graph. Yes, I am. Because this is what I do. Increases really, really rapidly as a function of decreasing temperature. So indicating very strongly we are a tropical species. Tropical species would not be ones to have okay, where am I going? If I go here, share screen. Oh, I have too many windows open, is what this is telling me. Way too many windows open. Oh, here we go. So if we just look here quickly, okay, this is not working well. Oh, here we go. You see here in the cold weather species, how as temperature goes down, you know, the costs don't go up very high, right? Indicating, and, you know, if we were to get into it, lots of adaptations here for dealing with cold weather. Whereas here, humans and, you know, other primates and things, small change in temperature, huge increase in metabolic costs, right? So we're a tropical species. We don't use hair basically in thermal regulation as such.
Well, that was what I was going to ask, because it seemed interesting that you mentioned that the hair kind of derived maybe as a thermal regulation, and that we are, you know, as humans are losing the hair for the opposite reason.
Yeah.
Jillian asks, could long hair on human heads be an adaptive benefit for infants to hold on to when humans carried infants when walking right up?
I don't know. You could speculate that. I don't know. You would have to, I'm trying to think of how you would even kind of address that. I worked with an indigenous tribe in Brazil. The one picture showed me there. They would generally, they made sort of sashes for carrying their young. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know. It's possible it could play some role.
And then in the same vein, Jen asks, is it protection from the sun?
It could be. Certainly we do see aspects of that in our natural history and our evolution of that you could look at distributions of things like male pattern baldness to see if there's correlations to solar exposure to latitude. It'd be speculative at this point. I don't know.
And I have a question for you. What is the most interesting hair in your opinion that you've come across, and why?
It would have to be sloth. I mean, sloths are just so weird across the board. I know a guy in Panama, like I kind of mentioned, is working with them and the fungal community of them and what's in there, and it's just they're just remarkable across the board in what they do, and they're just this bizarre ecology in general of, you have the algae and you have sloth moss, which is kind of unclear what they do or why they're there. You have them climbing down out of trees to defecate, all this algae and fungi, and they're just crazy animals. There's really no other way to describe it. They're just so interesting. So just
Yeah, I think we're all going to be looking at going down rabbit holes of sloth hair
yes.
following this. Do we
They
have any
swim.
other?
I
Go
do.
ahead.
Well, I'm not sure if you're talking to me.
Oh, you can. Yeah, go ahead.
So I wanted to start by saying this was brilliant. I loved this.
Thank you.
And I quickly looked at your webpage at Frostburg. Also is really thorough, and I look forward to reading through some of your publications. So one question is, can I audit your classes? Because I want to do your mammalian class now. Like, this was really, really cool, and I want to learn more.
Yeah, I mean, it's in person.
Oh, I don't do in person. I do in Baltimore. I do on Zoom. Have you considered doing Coursera classes? I mean, really, this this was a really
currently teaching animal behavior online. I don't know what the rules are for auditing it, though. You would have to contact admissions at Frostburg, because now that has less to do with, I mean, I'm a mammologist, so many of my behavioral examples come from mammals, but I do try to bring other things in there. And, some of the slides you saw today, I lifted out of my, lectures, especially a lot of the stuff on the color patterns and, camouflage and things like that.
Yeah, it's just,
well, maybe we'll have to have Dr. Lambert come in and teach a class if people from Western Maryland come over to Baltimore, and we can have them come teach a class for us at the society. He's not answering.
Oh, I nodded, sure.
That would be great, because sometimes we have more long form classes. We can maybe have one on an intro to mammalogy or something like that.
Yeah.
Do a whole weekend, 16 hours.
Potentially.
Do we have any other questions, comments? All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lambert, and thank you everybody for tuning in for Must Learn Thursday. We are all smarter now, and we take this knowledge and share it with other people, and it allows you more information to continue your quest for knowledge of understanding our natural world. And I look forward to inviting Dr. Lambert back to learn more because I agree this presentation has been wonderful.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.